Welcome to the latest edition of Leadership Actually. It's not love, this is leadership. We're talking about the human and the messy and what it can mean to be a leader in real terms, actually. Welcome, Lisa Powney.
Hi Lee, how are you doing? How have you been? What have you been enjoying recently?
You know I'm on this fitness thing, so I am trying my best to be really, really conscious about fitness, and I'm not eating like a whopper, is what I say.
Or a Whopper. Do they still have them?
Yeah, or have a Whopper, yeah. So I'm tracking food and all that good stuff, but yeah, trying to get myself in shape, and it's going well, but it can always improve. So that's what I'm on. What are you
Brilliant.
focusing on?
I've been having some really brilliant conversations with people who've got some amazing life stories, some of which will come on the podcast, I am sure. So yeah, I really love that sort of stuff. And I'm really excited today to meet you and our really special guest. Do you want to tell us more, Lee?
I would love to. It'd be my absolute privilege. So today we've got Baroness Dido Harding. How can I describe Dido? She is a powerhouse. I think others have said that I've been in her company. She's so energetic. She's dynamic. And the most brilliant characteristic I think I know her for is being so courageous. So she is somebody that stands up. She is somebody that kind of leans in. And to take a Brené Brown quote, and we've had a few of those, you have to be in the arena. Actually, there's no one else I would kind of want to put in the arena other than Dido, who I've experienced in my life, because she fronts it, right, and she faces it. And I've seen real hand people. I've seen lots of leaders talk about leadership and be there. And Dido's someone that absolutely stand out as someone that's led, in the most difficult of circumstances. And actually, a huge inspiration to me in terms of what I've tried to do with people to make them real, and to really showcase about what others should do, not by words actually, but by action. So welcome, Dido. Thank you so much for joining us today, and what a privilege it is to have you.
Well, that's a bit of a scary billing, Lee. Thank you. I'm blushing already.
Good.
Yeah, good. I am in awe. I've been reading and watching lots of your stuff, Dido, and I'm really excited to be part of this today, and hearing some of your stories. And what really comes across is the human side as well, and so many massive challenges that you faced against, and so many firsts as a first woman in lots of different things and taking on some really big challenges. And because we say this is a messy class, I am going to ask you a human question, I guess. So I'd like to know, what's one surprisingly human moment that you've had as a leader? Maybe a misstep or a messy moment, or one of those days. What comes to mind when I ask that question?
Well, thank you, because you gave me some advance warning about this, so I've had a chance to think about it a bit, and it made me really reflect. And so the story I wanted to tell you, that the moment was, I was in my mid-30s, and a friend of mine who was in the army sent me a copy of a book that everyone who graduates from Sandhurst is given, called Serve to Lead.
Yes.
And in this book, there's a speech that my grandfather gave. And my grandfather, at this stage, I'm in my mid-30s, had been dead for 15 years. And the moment is, my husband found me reading his speech that I'd never seen before. And it was a speech he gave in the 50s when he was the head of the British Army. And John found me in floods of tears reading this speech. And John's like, and this is a sort of Saturday afternoon at home. John's like, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" And and the reason I was crying was that I read this speech that was written, 15 years before I was born, about what my grandfather believed military leadership was about. And in that speech was stuff that I couldn't tell you why I believe it to be true. I hold those things to be sort of a priori truths, and they're not. He obviously taught me when I was a child, because I was the much adored eldest grandchild. And so and my granny died when I was 15. So I was his plus one in my late teens and early 20s. And I mean, much younger, I used to water the plants with him in his greenhouse when I was 4. But all along the way, he must have taught me, because I was sitting there and I'm mentally, as I talk to you now, I'm back in my study reading that speech, flooded with emotion, realizing that the things that I hold true are because he explained, role modeled, coached, supported, without ever telling me that that's what he believed leadership was. So that's my messy moment.
Wow, that is an incredible story. And I can feel that emotion, when you take us back there. That was not where I was expecting it to go. But how amazing as well, to be able to discover that history and that real core part of what you do. Knowing that, how do you think that's driven your career? Because you've had an amazing career, really diverse. How has that taken you through your journey to where you are today?
It's driven me both positively and negatively. There's a part of me that always will feel that I am a failure because I have not achieved what he achieved. That he was my gold standard, my sort of parrot on my shoulder all the way through my life, has been and continues to be, which is, as I say, both positive and negative. Positive because he showed me that he left school at 16. His family couldn't afford for him to go to university. He started, his first job was a clerk in the post office in London that would have been in 1912. And in 1914, he was 18 years old and he signed up as a territorial in the British Army. And he finished his career as the head of the army. And so he gave me this belief that if you work hard, you try your best, everything is, yes, he will, just get rid of that. So he had such a positive impact on my life. But he also always made me feel that unless I was a Second World War general, I'd failed. One of the things in that speech that I read, that he talks about the elements of leadership, and one of the things he talks about is courage. So, Lee, you said that's the thing that you think about with me. The thing my grandfather taught me was you can't be brave unless you're afraid. And I remember him telling me that when I was scared about going to university. So my youngest daughter started at uni on Saturday. So I'm any parent who's got university-aged children will know that I'm turning somersaults worrying about her, wanting to make sure she's okay. And I remember so I've been thinking about this weekend. I remember when I was heading to uni and I was scared about university, and him talking to me about how if you're not trying new things and on that edge where you are a bit nervous, you're not really living. And the examples he used was being a subaltern in Gallipoli and being wounded in North Africa in the Second World War. And it, simultaneously sort of made my problems feel so small, but he did it in such a way that it's never left me that it's okay to be afraid. It's what you do with the fear that matters. So I'm not actually that courageous. I'm as scared as everybody is because we're all human. That's what you are. It's whether you choose to run towards it and deal with the problem or whether you choose to run away. And for good or ill, I'm afraid I run towards, channeling my grandfather in every problem I face.
I've been a little bit quiet because I'm like I'm holding back the emotion, right? You said that in such a human way. Like me and my granddad, it was a similar it was a similar thing. To this day, it is that thing, and anyone listening to this will know, and even in society today, I'm really curious around, do kids get the same access and the same time? Hopefully they do, in such depth, because actually it's so special and it can be so fundamental to so many people. And I just love that, like you say you're not courageous. I definitely think you are, but the element is you leaning in, and I think that's what I referred to, is that's what I saw in open buckets and spades actually. And not only like you doing that then meant that others did it because you role modeled that.
Yeah, but it is also a weakness. I often need to have people around me who will say, steady, don't leave. I'm I'm like this in all parts of my life. So no, I'm a much better jockey than I am skier, but I ski with the same attitude. So if somebody says to me, oh, I don't think you can get down that slope, I'm halfway down before they finish the sentence. So I need people around me who might be more cautious and say, whoa, think about it before you leap. You don't have to prove yourself all the time. And part of the leadership journey I've been on, that's why I say my grandfather is both strength and weakness, is that one of the things I had to learn was to take him off my shoulder and not to feel that I wasn't worthy and that I had to live up to him in everything I do, but to feel okay in myself. And I do think that's the other key component to be a really effective leader under pressure, is you have to be okay yourself, because you can't, the truism of, you need to put your own face mask on first, own oxygen mask on first, is really true. You can't lead an organization or help others unless you're feeling on solid ground yourself. And so investing in that, one of the things I need is strong people around me who will occasionally make me think twice before I head straight down the double black diamond.
And when did you realise that? You said about being on a leadership journey, and what was it that was the catalyst for that? And second question to that is what permission or what culture do you create to enable that, to have the people to challenge? And
I think those are two great questions, Lee. I've been incredibly lucky in my working life to work in a number of organisations that really believed in management development, and particularly in personal leadership development. So, I started my career at McKinsey, and McKinsey, it's a long time ago now, were very good at giving young graduates some of the basic tools to start to learn how to do this. But then also at Tesco and at Sainsbury's, I was introduced to sort of professional coaching. And, sport is my passion, as you know, horse racing. I'm fond of saying, if the very, very best in the world in sports always have a coach, why in business wouldn't you do the same thing? And so I grew up in my 20s and 30s in organisations that believed in that. In some cases, it's much more normal now than it was way back when, in ancient times when I was in my 20s at Tesco. But so I was introduced in those environments to self-analysis and team analysis and neuro-linguistic programming techniques to develop my understanding of who I was. And I would say that is an ongoing journey, as is all coaching. It's never done. You have to keep working at it. So I was very lucky in my formative management years. I would actually say the epiphany came for me in a time of trouble, really. I was at Tesco. This would have been, trying to work out, I've been in my early 30s. And I was hugely ambitious, desperately keen to get onto the board of Tesco. And I didn't really fit culturally in the organisation. I was quite different. I was from the outside. I spent 8 years at Tesco, and when I left, the HR director asked me if there had been a problem with the induction, just to give you a sense of how I was still really seen as an outsider. And it was the first time in my working life that I wasn't succeeding at the pace that I thought I should. And I was introduced to a fabulous management coach called Maggie Rose, who actually I've worked with on and off ever since. And Maggie delivered some really tough feedback to me, because it was the first time I had to face into how people who were very different to me saw me, for good and for ill. And that forced a really big reevaluation of who I was and what I wanted to be. And I'm actually eternally grateful to Maggie and to Tesco for helping me through that. It did lead me to choose to leave Tesco and work out that I did not fit there. But that was the pivot point where I had to sort of decide who I was. If I know I'm talking too much, but there were two main bits of feedback that they gave me. And what I learned was sometimes you have to take the feedback, and sometimes the learning is in not taking the feedback. So the two bits of feedback I had, one was that they didn't see me present as a senior leader. That's a polite way of saying they thought I dressed scruffily, that I just didn't look like a board member. And yeah, exactly. Now, my mum was so angry at that feedback, But she was even more angry because I chose to take the feedback. I concluded that if what I wore, what handbag I carried, what suitcase I used affected whether I was heard in the room, that was easy. That was really easy to change. And I learned it does make a big difference. How we present, we all judge people through non-verbal communication in a heartbeat. And from that day, I think really consciously every morning, what am I doing today and how do I need to look? Not just what am I going to say or how am I going to be? And my mum used to get so cross when my bright pink Radley handbag appeared, because I am not a bright pink Radley handbag girl. And she's like, I can't believe you've done that. I said, no, it's all right, Mum. I've not changed who I am, but people find it easier to accept me if I carry the handbag. And the other piece of feedback they gave me was that I said we too much in the boardroom, not I. Basically, that I wasn't macho enough. That I needed to be more Tesco, more male and macho, and less collaborative, less giving the credit to other people. And I chose not to take that feedback because actually that is a core part of who I am. And I'm a member of a team. Even as the chief executive and chair, I'm a member of the team, not just the leader of the team. I much prefer to work in teams and work with people and give credit to the person who's written the document if I haven't written it. And I wasn't willing to give that up in order to succeed at Tesco. And it was very painful to leave an organisation I had a lot of respect for. But I left because I couldn't be me. And so that was a real pivot point for me. And I crossed the floor of the house, so to speak, from Tesco to Sainsbury's, because at that time, Sainsbury's was a much less good business than Tesco, but it was a much more diverse and inclusive business where my style of leadership was more openly accepted. And so that was my real pivot point of learning how others saw me. And, that is always an ongoing journey. But that first realization of, oh my goodness, this is who you think I am, and I need to be in a place where I can be me.
There are so many lessons in there already, that I've taken personally from that. And, as much of your career, you have been, a senior female in those very top positions. Do you think, things have changed, and have you been able, through your different roles since then, be able to be you and have that kind of leadership? And I'd be really interested to know what is that leadership style that you really embrace?
I mean, I think clearly the world's changed on so many levels. And I think in the prep for this, Lee, that you sent me, you had a quote from me that I would have said in my 30s, that I want people to judge me for who I am, not because I'm a woman. And I'm certainly that generation of female leader that grew up not wanting to be part of any women's network because I didn't want to be labelled as a woman. And it took me till probably late into my 40s to realise that actually I had a responsibility as a senior woman to be a part of those female networks and to help bring up the next generation and the next generation. And I wouldn't feel the way that I did in my 30s now. And I look at women coming up younger than me, and they're much more comfortable being women than my generation were. So that has to be a good thing. I think we are much more conscious today of sort of the intersectional issues of not just sex, but race, social social deprivation as well. It's a much more complex picture than maybe my generation thought that we were fighting. Let's be clear. I'm an incredibly privileged Oxbridge graduate who had a private education and a very nice upper middle class family life. So there's lots of advantage I had, which others don't have, who are white and male. And so I think the world today is we're all much more conscious of the complexity. I don't think it's necessarily that much easier. And because you asked, I'm very much, I haven't asked your second question, what kind of a leader am I? I'm a really firm believer that people do their best work when they're being true to who they are, rather than trying to pretend to be something they're not. And so the reason why diversity matters in any leadership team is that we are all different. And if you want to get the best out of your team, you've got to allow people to be that difference. But diverse teams are much harder to lead the non-diverse teams. It's much easier to be in a team where everybody thinks the same way.
Yeah.
It's why non-diverse teams are sort of average performers, and diverse teams are often the very best or the very worst. So if you believe, as I do, in trying to create an environment where people can be themselves, I'm a very, my husband would say, very touchy-feely, Mooney-esque leader, in the sense that I like to spend time enabling team members to get to know each other, to know who they really are. We at TalkTalk, as Lee knows, we spend a lot of time building trust amongst senior teams and encouraging them to do that with their teams. I think it's one of the things that stood the test of time when TalkTalk was in real crisis. By the way, it's about 10 years ago, next month, that the TalkTalk cyber attack happened. And the reason TalkTalk survived that, one of the reasons, is that the leadership team, all of us, including our board, knew each other as human beings. We knew our strengths and weaknesses. We knew how to play to each other's strengths, and we trusted each other. So that doesn't happen overnight. You have to build that trust in order to be able to be fit for challenge. And so I'm the kind of leader that tries to invest in building those relationships and trust. And I've learned over the years that that's not a nice to do as the leader of a team. That's the must do if you want the team to excel.
Absolutely. And it's been core to, some of the amazing people that we've interviewed, that is really core to, success and bringing people forward. How do you do that, though, in the kind of environments that you work? Give us some insight on how you might do that on a day-to-day.
So I'm trying to do some of it on this podcast, which is you do it by being authentically you. By being, and that, I am a extrovert, you get all of me in one go, but that doesn't mean that that's the way you have to do it to be an inclusive leader. If you are personally more introverted and more compartmentalized, you have to be true to who you are. People smell it instantly if you are trying to be someone you're not. So that's the first step as a leader. You've got to be true, and that means you've got to know who you are. So if you actually aspire to create an inclusive team, you've got to do a lot of work on yourself first and on an ongoing basis, because that's not a static place. I'm okay right now. The world could change in half an hour and I might not be feeling so okay. So step one is working on yourself. And then step two is encouraging your team to be similarly authentic and open. And I learned first at TalkTalk that that brings huge benefits in good times and bad. But then I doubled down and learned it even more so during the pandemic, when I was working in the centre of COVID and building sort of NHS test and trace, which I know triggers people in lots of different ways. What we learned there was that it was possible to build a trusted, inclusive, very diverse team extremely quickly if you follow the same basic principles, which is, work on yourself, be authentic, create psychologically safe spaces where people can share who they are so they know each other well enough to cope with the pressure, and invest in the people even when it feels like you can't possibly spend any time on that. Actually, even if it's half an hour, in peacetime you might spend a day, in COVID time you might spend half an hour, but that half an hour enables people to connect as human beings, that gives them the strength as a team and as individuals to go and do extraordinary things afterwards. So I keep going about it. I am a passionate believer that if from the very top of the organisation you invest in leadership strength, it repays on a better ROI than anything else you'll ever do.
I really feel that passion. Amazing.
And I've seen that from you, and in some ways I think that's where I led to become a team coach at TalkTalk, actually, because we were doing it in the realm, but actually it became much more focused, to be much more specific and intentional to support the executive committee and their teams, so that we got that real focus, not just periodically, but actually on the ongoing basis that you talked about before, in terms of it being an ongoing piece. Because I genuinely think it's not just for individuals to do that on an ongoing basis, it's actually for teams, and the dynamics as the complexity and the context changes, to do that on an ongoing basis. I, you know, just on the piece, because you've talked about the cyber attack there and about NHS test and trace. They're two huge national things. Have you coped with the visibility and the scrutiny of that? From a personal level, because anyone, Dido, like dealing with one of those two things might be career limiting, ending, whatever. You've embraced two of those huge moments with such grace, humility, and dignity. What's it taken?
I don't really know. Lots of things. I think at the core, what has always given me resilience is sense checking back with my own moral compass. Am I doing what I think is right? If in the end, and for a long time, it happens much less now, it will be happening to Archie Norman at the team at M&S now, but for a long time after the TalkTalk cyber attack, I used to get phone calls from chief execs who I didn't know very well, leaving me a very stressed voicemail saying, Mum, I think you might be able to help me. Could you give me a call? And I'd smile to myself and go, oh, that's a cyber attack. And I'd always call back and say, how can I help? And the advice I always used to give people was, I can't promise that you will keep your job. I can't promise that your company will survive, but I can promise that you'll sleep at night if you work out what your role is and what your objective really is. In TalkTalk's case, it was to protect our customers. Charles Dunstan and I came to the conclusion very quickly that if we protected our customers as much as we could, let's forget whether or not we could or couldn't have avoided being attacked, but having been attacked, our job was to do the utmost that we possibly could for our customers. And if we did that, things would work out as best they possibly could. And once you've worked out that that's your objective, so long as what I was doing along the way was true to that, I was okay. I didn't mind any of the criticism because I was being true to what mattered to me and the organisation I was leading and the stakeholders that mattered most to me, my customers. The same was true in test and trace on steroids, really, because we were on a mission to try and save lives, and no more powerful a mission. And we made lots and lots and lots of mistakes. But my goodness, we all tried our best every single hour of every single day. And I got to do that with an extraordinary support team in both cases. So I've found that if your purpose is true and you can stick to that purpose, actually you find the strength. People will walk through walls if what they believe in what they're doing. And if they've got, there's a really great theory about what creates drive. I don't know if you've read it, it's a book called Drive, which is if you believe in the purpose, if you have agency, if you believe that what you're doing will make a difference to that purpose, and you're continuing to develop, if you have those three things, purpose, agency, and development, you'll do anything. So in those moments of crisis, for me, I had all those three in huge measure. So why wouldn't you keep going? When you're doing something you really believe in, that you have got the tools to make a difference, and you're learning and growing as a human being in the process. It's not hard to find resilience in those circumstances. Actually, there, of course, I make it sound that's all rosy. It's not. But for me, the thing that has always then enabled me to keep going is having a proper support network around me. The fact that you get the whole of me, my family. Now, I always say higher highs and lower lows than anything in life being a parent. But, my family are hugely important to me, as they are to every parent. And as are my friends, as are the teams I've built who've become friends. So, and I've learned over the years to listen to them when they tell me I need to sleep and when I need to eat. And for me, my trigger is often when I need to exercise. When I've you were talking about your health kick, Lee. For me, I know that the stress is getting to me and my resilience is faltering when I deprioritize exercising. And I've learned over the years that that's a warning signal to watch for. And that once I've convinced myself I don't have time to exercise, it's exactly the time that I must.
I totally recognise that, like unbelievably recognise that, and I think we've come a lot further I think, for particularly senior leaders in that space. I think the dynamic and the evidence and the science absolutely equates to that, but also from a high performance kind of perspective. And you talk about the relationship to sport. I think it's there, it's clear, and it's evidence.
Yeah. Do you know, one of the great things I learned, our chief information officer in COVID, Simon Bolton, Simon is a huge athlete and runner, and he taught us all, because obviously no one had time, did they, in COVID? We certainly had no time. And he said, get dressed in your running kit. And then if you've got a 15-minute window in the middle of the day, just walk out the door and run. And it was a genius piece of advice. With everybody in Zoom calls from 7 a.m. till midnight, you'd see everyone at first call. We'd all be in our running kit, and it would be a joke. Has anyone had a chance to run yet today? But it was absolutely genius, just removing the friction and taking the excuses away, and knowing that even if you went for a walk or a run in that 15-minute window, you would be better for the rest of the day.
Amazing. I love that. I feel guilty I've not got my shorts on now, to be honest.
I do use it as since even now, occasionally when I know I'm getting too stressy, and I know I have got time to run, but I convince myself I haven't, I will get dressed in my running gear and put a jacket over the top to do a Zoom call, and then it just takes away an excuse. It's thank you, Simon. It was a brilliant suggestion.
Love it. I love it. And it's very human, isn't it? You know, that we could do all of those things. You know, I've heard throughout is that internal work is so important, and that authenticity. And I think if your grandfather was here today, he would be really proud of what you've got to say here today. And you know, I feel like we're really in safe hands. You know, that impression comes across really strongly, that says, you know, we've got this and I've got you, and I want to put the time in to, even in this podcast, to, you know, share some of this. And I know that you can't, you don't expect to have all the wisdom either. You know, you put your arms out and go, there are other people who can help with that, you know, but you are so brave as well. You step in and, you know, and you drive that forward, which is absolutely fantastic. So what is happening now? We've talked right there, like what's next? What are you working on? I know you're in the House of Lords. Lots of people might not even know what goes on there. You know, what are you doing now?
What am I doing in my life at the moment? So I'd say, well, I highlight three things. So, well, you mentioned the House of Lords. I probably spend a day or two in the Lords each week when the House is sitting. I work mainly on digital things. That's the reason I went into the House of Lords in the first place. When Lee and I were at TalkTalk pioneered child internet safety, sort of enabling you to block social media on your home Wi-Fi. We were the first company ever to do that in the UK. So I work on digital regulation a lot in the Lords. So not just child protection, online safety, but also digital competition. I think we're living through a period not unlike the Industrial Revolution. You know, we need to think through how we create incentives for tech companies to come in. It's very topical today with the Trump visit and all the tech titans coming. But we also know that completely unregulated big business tends to do bad things. You know, that was true of the robber barons of the railroads and the banks in the 19th century, and it's as true of the tech companies in the 21st century. So I work on digital regulation. That's one thing. And the House of Lords is an amending part of the legislative process. So we go into the detail. A lot of us, I've been in the Lords for a decade, believe it or not, and we work together across party. It's not very party political, actually. So my friends in the Lords are across all the different parties who have a shared interest in digital. So I do that. And then the other thing I do at the moment is, with my love of, I was a very bad amateur jockey for 20 years. That's my passion. My sporting passion is horse racing. And I chair an organisation called the Jockey Club, which is a 275-year-old institution. And I'm the first woman to chair it in 275 years, which is quite daunting. And we're essentially a not-for-profit. So we used to be the regulator of the sport, a bit like the MCC, or Wimbledon, the Lawn Tennis Association. But now we are a racecourse operator. We put on the Grand National at Aintree, the Cheltenham Festival, the Derby, the Guinea. So we own a lot of racecourses, but we're a not-for-profit whose purpose is to support the long-term health and future of British horse racing. So it turns out horse racing is almost as complex and as political as the NHS, actually. So it's quite all-consuming. So those are my two big things. And then I've referenced my third, which is learning how to be an empty nester. So my youngest left for uni on Saturday, and her sister's in her second year at uni, and my husband and I are 4 days into being empty nesters and slightly perplexed about what this means for the next chapter of our lives.
Biggest purpose, eh? Being a parent is the biggest job. So yeah, how we
spot on.
He's like,
my best friend is coming back today from a 6-week. They've just been travelling for 6 weeks in Asia because he competed at the World Championship swimming for his age group, and he's like they retired at 55. It's taken him 5 years to then go and do anything, and he's away and he's doing all these amazing things all of a sudden, but it's taken him 5 years to figure it out. So I don't for 1 minute think it'll take you 5 years. Actually.
Well, we'll see. Watch this space, Lee.
Can I just, the final thing from me, other than huge thank you and the admiration actually, around that, you threw out there, I'm the first female chair for 275 years. That just goes on to the list of what you do. And I know you're very humble about that stuff. The one thing I always remember is when you had 3,000 of us at TalkTalk and we did a conference and you brought a customer letter. Right, and I'll never forget it to this day about Sandra, right? And we had all the lights and all the food and personalities that would come and celebrities. And that one letter you read from a customer, and your simple call to action to us was, we need to do better. And to this day, like when you talk about being customer focused or organizational focused, I genuinely think that back to that moment. And what you described to us was saying, I think she was a midwife, and you said we need to do better because of the service that she's doing for others. So I just want to, I guess, thank you for inspiring something in me and the rest of us, a whole load of people, about actually focusing on the details. What is the purpose and the drive? And I don't think you really truly appreciate the impact you have. So from me, I just want to say thank you.
You're so kind, but honestly, it's Charles Dunstan taught me all that. Charles is the genius who really, I learned, Charles, when I first arrived at TalkTalk, and it was Charles who used to read all of the customer complaints he got every day and start trying to solve individual customers' problems. He taught me that. You should be giving, I feel that's not my credit to receive. That's Charles. That's okay. Charles's genius.
Well, and final question then is, who should we have in the hot seat in this that you consider is an absolutely inspirational leader?
Well, I've given Charles lots of credit, but I was going to, what I had thought, because again, you'd warned me about this, and I'd been thinking what would be interesting. One of the privileges of my career has been that I've worked in both the private sector, the public sector, now the sort of not-for-profit sector. And I don't think there's enough in this country permeability between all of those, sort of recognising that actually the leadership skills are basically the same. So I spent 5 years in the NHS and after TalkTalk, and leadership in the health system is so hard. It's very easy and topical to criticise the leaders in the NHS, but trying to lead a hospital is so much harder than leading a supermarket or a telecoms business. So much more complex. The outcomes matter so much more to your customers, your end users, and your workforce is so much smarter, which often makes it harder. So I was thinking, who in the healthcare system would I want you to talk to do that? And there were a couple of people. I'm not sure I can deliver them for you, but I was in awe of Chris Whitty during the pandemic. I view it as one of the privileges of my life to have worked alongside Chris and spoken to him every day for a year and watched the way that he handled the personal pressure and the scrutiny and the sort of godlike decisions that government was asking his advice on. So I learned so much from Chris in the way in which he handled himself. So he was my first choice. And then an alternative, someone who you might not have heard of actually, who's currently the chief executive of the Care Quality Commission that inspects healthcare systems, a chap called Julian Hartley. And I worked with Julian on how we build a people plan for the NHS, and about 6 years ago. And Julian is one of the most humble, down-to-earth leaders I've ever met. He ran lead teaching hospitals for about a decade, and he's taken on at the moment an incredibly difficult job. As the CQC has got lots of problems and critics, and it's a very high profile, challenging role. And I happen to be having dinner with him in the next couple of weeks, so I was thinking I could ask Julian if he would do this, because I think you'd hear servant leadership at its very best. The NHS and healthcare professionals in general do servant leadership in a way that I think the private sector could really learn from, and Julian and Chris are two great examples of that.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Been a real privilege. You say that a lot about other people, but this has been a real privilege. You are so humble, and I've learned so much personally and feel really personally inspired, and I'm sure everybody else will listening to this. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Lee, for setting it up. It's just phenomenal.
No, not at all. Thank you for doing a rather brilliant job of getting me to talk about things I don't necessarily talk quite this openly about. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Right, okay, so the final thing to say is listen, follow, subscribe to the latest additions to this down below, as Lisa always reminds me. And we'd love to hear what you think of it and what do you take away. How can you use some of the advice and some of the hints and tips? How do you go and put them into your daily lives? Thanks so much, and see you next time.